All right. Hello,
Hey,
everyone.
hello.
We are doing our first live interview today. My name is Keri Roberts. I'm part of the Inside Voice podcast, which is part of the Voice brand. And so one of the new things we're doing is we are doing live interviews. And so today you can see it on Facebook, trying to get it on LinkedIn and some other places as well. And if you have comments, you can put them in the comment section too. And today my guest is Lars Murray, who I'm very excited to welcome. He has been in the music industry for a long time. He has worked in senior positions within the marketing space for companies like Virgin Records, Sony Music, as well as Pandora. And now he is a co-owner and partner over at Voxali, which is a voice technology company helping musicians and artists to kind of build their audience. So welcome, Lars. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Keri. Thanks for having me.
Excited. Yes, excited to have you. So I would love for you to start out with, your background in music. Like, what got you excited about being in music? How did you get kind of into the industry in the first place?
Well, I always listened to music, but I started out back in the days of yore in college radio, actually in college commercial radio at a commercial radio station in Providence, Rhode Island called WBRU. I was a DJ there. I was the music director there. So my grounding is in audio. I was always a radio kid growing up out in the boondocks when we didn't, in the pre-MTV days. So I got into radio after that. Spent a couple of years in radio sales, but pretty much directly after college started working for a record label, because really what my passion was promoting artists and working with artists and all the things that go with that. So my roots are in the music industry go very deep. It was pretty much all I always wanted to do, and pretty much all I did in college. I did manage to pass my way through college, but mostly spent my time at the radio station, and then happened to be lucky enough in one of my jobs to share an office with a computer consultant, and that got me started in digital way back in the day. So that's pretty much how I got started in music. How I got started in digital and new technology and things like that was that I was the guy at the record label who had a very nebulous job title. So back in the early days of digital, they'd say, "Hey, you go do this. Go find out what the internet's all about." So I happened to be in the right place at the right time when the music industry started going online, and the rest is 6 to 9 month cycles of new developments. So.
And as we were mentioning earlier, for those coming on, you have worked for some of the top record labels. What are some of the artists that you worked with that you can share with us?
Worked with all kinds of artists, developing artists, starting some of my favorite projects that I've worked with on the developing side are bands like Manchester Orchestra and Band of Horses. Some of the bigger names and bigger hits would be Daft Punk and Pharrell, and a lot of rock acts as well. Everybody from Korn to Gorillaz. Gorillaz is one of my favorite ones. Did a couple of records with them and had a lot of fun with that. There are too many for me to list, and they did most of the best work. We were just supporting them. So.
Yeah, I love that. And we have Patrick Sweetman is on. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. I would love to talk about South by Southwest. So part of the reason I wanted to bring you on, with everything going on in the world, like many events, South by Southwest got canceled. And I know I was supposed to be there as well. And it's been going on, I think, over like 30 years, right? And I know it started as like a music festival and has turned into a tech festival and that sort of thing. Can you talk about, from a kind of an artist standpoint, why South by Southwest is such a big deal? And what are some of the ramifications with it being canceled now for artists that weren't able to attend this year?
Well, I'm very concerned for South by Southwest now, because what had happened over the last few years, over 30 years, it's kind of come full circle. It went from being this sort of niche, almost Americana, almost regional conference when it first started, to being first an indie mecca, and then in the 90s and then into the 2000s, the major labels started showing up in force. Then Interactive started, and they started Interactive, I think, in the late 90s, but it really started gathering steam in the late aughts. But the reason historically it's kind of complex actually, and I'm concerned about it because it's come full circle from being niche to having been the Super Bowl to going back to being not quite as important as it used to be because of the changes in the industry. It used to be that you went to South by Southwest as an artist to get signed and to expose yourself to the press. As time has gone by, and as it's gotten as the industry's changed, and as the revenue streams have moved off of recorded music and more into the live space, the need to do that and the way cycles and the criteria by which people get signed have changed. It used to be that you would route somebody through South by Southwest, and it was sort of a standard thing you did with a developing act. You would build a whole tour around it, going either west to east or east to west through the month of March. What happened? But South by Southwest also didn't pay. Historically, the back in the 90s and the aughts, the record label would cover the cost of the artist to be there. South by Southwest actually didn't pay the artists themselves. Then a culture of day parties built up around that. Artists started to use those day parties to finance their trips. The label stopped paying so much for them, and that money started to get crazy big. And that peaked, I would say, probably around 2014, where pretty much every square inch of of Austin downtown was turned into a venue space or a brand activation. At that point, I think a lot of the big brands looked at their ROI on South by Southwest and started pulling out, which made also for a bit of because the underlying purpose of being there had shifted from getting signed or having publicity to actually financing your tour. Once that corporate money went away, it sort of changed the dynamic back to a niche discovery thing for insiders. And so it's been getting smaller the last couple of years anyway, and this is kind of a blow. I wasn't planning on going this year actually myself. This is the first year in about 20 years that I haven't gone. But I would like to know that it's there and like to have the option to go there. So it'll be really interesting to see what's happening with canceled tours this year. There's a lot of activity around live streaming and recreating some of the panels. I've got some friends who are working on that. But mostly I think it's just been really disruptive because it came down so fast, and because the disruption of the coronavirus is so great. It's got not only South by Southwest has been canceled, but tours have been canceled, and every artist has to make a decision as to whether they're actually going to expose their fans. And I think most of them are saying we're not going to do that, and most of the venues are either being compelled or making the same choice.
Yeah, and before I get into, some things they can do, I was looking at the South by Southwest website, and there still is a lot of bands and singer-songwriters and artists that go there. And a lot of them are looking for support. They're looking for, a label. They're looking to be signed. They're looking for marketing help. And, I think in this day and age, people always think like, oh, you don't need the record labels, but a lot of them seem to really help from a marketing standpoint. So is there anything that when a record label is looking for a new artist to sign or to help, like what type of things are they looking for? Are they looking for audience numbers? Are they looking for a particular sound? What type of things would you say that a label is looking for to sign?
Well, it depends on the label, but I mean, if you're talking about a major label, generally what they're looking at is streaming numbers and social followings and the ability for somebody to command a large online following and turn that into streaming listens. On the smaller level, indie labels will be looking for artists who can draw crowds live, and can, and they figure if you're drawing a certain number of people live, you're going to be able to convert those into streams in a greater number, and will tune in. It really depends on the level. It depends a lot on the genre too. The one thing that is, I think, pretty common across all A&R is that you have to have some sort of following, and this is why South by Southwest can still be important, and why any kind of touring can still be important. You have to drive streams. You have to show some presence in the marketplace. But touring used to be the promotional activity, and the cash in was on masters, and now that's somewhat inverted. where the streaming and the actual listening of music is not as lucrative as the actual touring. So if you go to South by Southwest, you're probably looking for an agent as much as you're looking for a label.
And so, yeah, that brings up a good point. I mean, I know you're talking about streaming, you're talking about building an audience, which, people are not buying albums like they used to. They're not buying CDs or cassettes or whatever. It is about streaming. It is about listening on Spotify, Pandora, various platforms. And so now you are in voice technology. Can you talk a little bit about first what made you have an interest in kind of transitioning into this voice tech space?
Yeah, I mean, in a streaming environment where you're listening to all of your music on Spotify, or if you're listening to and you're getting all of your information online, and you're not necessarily listening to radio, and you're not necessarily getting your curation from traditional sources. The issue or the problem that I saw when I came out of Pandora about 2 years ago was that contextualizing yourself in a screenless environment where people are walking around just listening to Spotify or just listening to Pandora, where a lot of it is being thrown at you algorithmically. If somebody likes you and they want to know about you, and you're not, they're not looking at a screen, if they're driving, if they're doing the dishes, if they're doing whatever they do when they're listening passively, and they don't have a DJ to say, this is a great band, and they don't have any context, they kind of have to take that into their own hands. And what I found was that the only thing that was happening in voice was if you asked about an artist as opposed to play an artist, the voice experience for playing music is great. You just ask Alexa or ask Google Assistant to play the song that you want to hear. But if they want to know anything about you, both of those systems default to Wikipedia, and which is fine because Wikipedia will tell somebody who you are, but it won't tell you when you're on tour. It won't tell you what the new single is. It won't speak for you. It's very hard to control Wikipedia. So the problem that I set out to solve was, how does an artist contextualize themselves in this screenless environment, in this all voice environment? So those are the problems we threw ourselves at, and it's developed a couple of different solutions.
Yeah, and Patrick had a question. Let's just see. He said, how are musicians using voice tech? Awesome discussion so far. Lots of valuable expertise. Are labels doing anything with Alexa skills, or unsigned musicians using Alexa for musicians? Thank you, Patrick, for your question. So if you want to answer some of that, if is anyone doing this right now? I mean, I know that's a lot of what your company does. Maybe you want to talk about what your company Voxali does first, and then answer some of Patrick's questions here.
Well, I mean, I can sort of, that's a good framing of what we're doing. So the answer is the way that people have started to engage in voice is through the skills marketplace, and people start, and to their credit, a lot of labels and a lot of artists, when Alexa started to gain traction, and this is almost 4 years ago now, and personally, I noticed it when I was at Pandora. Right after Alexa launched, it turned out that Pandora was doing something crazy, like 40% of all Alexa use was people using Pandora, which was in our earnings call that quarter at Pandora, and spoke to a real strength of Pandora, but also a weakness of Amazon, and because Amazon really hadn't geared up their own music service to service voice. And this is, again, 3 years ago. They've done a great job since then of moving forward, although there's still a lot of work to do. So Amazon was encouraging artists to create skills. The problem is there's a bit of a chicken egg problem with skills. One is, a skill is not free. I mean, it actually costs money to invest. And anybody who's investing anything in an artist wants to know how that's going to grow their audience. And the fact that you couldn't really measure that audience in voice very well, the fact that voice is still not a fully adopted behavior among many segments, most notably college students, which is where a lot of music promotion happens. That's sort of the sweet spot for music promotion. There have been a lot of fits and starts, but mostly what happened was that Amazon, the skills and actions were just outside of the main marketing mix and a little expensive for everybody to do. The other thing is, there's no community around if you're an artist and you create your own skill, there's no community function there the way there is in social networks. They're not very shareable. And so what we set out to do at Voxely was to come up with a solution that was easy for artists to engage in, with very, very small investment, mostly investment of time, very little investment of money, and also one that would aggregate a lot of artist information so that people would know that if they ask VoiceDrop about an artist, that they're going to get the artist's voice. We wanted to make it really, really simple for the artists to do it, and get their people to sign up. And it's still slow going. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of creating awareness around even this concept. Once people get on board the concept, they find out how easy it is to update, and how easy it is, how many options they have, and also how magical it is to ask VoiceDrop about an artist and have that artist answer you directly. That's been a lot of fun. So.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something that I have talked a lot about in this voice tech space is, people are usually listening to or interacting rather with voice one-on-one. And so you don't see the community, you don't see the interaction, which is really challenging. How do you suggest somebody kind of build a community or build an audience within the music industry, whether that's coming from the artist directly or for a record label that's trying to use it?
Well, any music marketer is looking to build habitual or subscription behavior, whether it's on a social, whether it's on an email list, or whatever. I mean, whether it's a website. I think most promotion has migrated to YouTube and socials. Primarily Instagram, Facebook for certain artists. And for the last 15 years, I've been hearing that email is dead. But email is still a very effective way to engage people. And you can tell by the spam that you receive every day. And also the email responds very well. So when you look at something like voice does not have an inherent community factor. Then you have to look at it the way you would look at something that's more direct and more one-to-one and more personalized. So that's what we look to do. And so we created VoiceDrop, so that the artist is speaking directly to the person who's asked the question. But we also backed it up with subscription behavior. So we've actually there's an email element to VoiceDrop wherein you can subscribe. So every time an artist puts up a new VoiceDrop update, it shoots an email to their following so that they know to ask. We're also experimenting with notifications, on the device itself. But designing for voice is not just designing for smart speakers. You want to be designing for, a lot of people are interacting on their phones. Lots of people are interacting in their cars. We think this is a long game. It is a long game. The way 4-year-olds interact with Alexa is a lot different than the way 14-year-olds do, and the way 65-year-olds do is a lot different from the way that 18-year-olds do. So there's still a lot of work to be done here. We're starting with the most simple proposition, which is you should be able to control your own voice when somebody asks on Google Assistant or Alexa about you.
Yeah, and you touched on a few things there as well that I think are really important, which is about, I always talk about this idea of inclusion and being able to connect to an audience that's of different ages. Like you said, a 4-year-old, a 65-year-old, someone living in China versus someone living in the US. I mean, everybody wants to interact in a way that's specific to them. So I think it's important when we come from a conversational design piece for those that are in the voice tech field. And the other thing you touched on is we talk about voice marketing all the time, and people just think like people should just discover their stuff. But I like that you're coupling it with email. Whatever you couple it with, it's kind of part of your ecosystem as a whole when it comes to marketing. It's not a standalone thing. So I love that you are touching on that. Can you give us an example of how VoiceDrops works? So let's say you have an artist who does have a following. I mean, South by Southwest, a lot of those people had followings on Instagram for the most part. So how could they maybe use Instagram and use your platform, for example, to help them build an audience and kind of grow their following so that if they want to do this full time or they want to work with a record label or the record label wants to do it, that they can?
So I'm gonna digress a little from VoiceDrop because VoiceDrop is the easiest way to do it. You can literally just go to getvoicedrop.com, sign up, we will onboard you, and you can start doing it. I would, in terms of marketing, we've worked. I'll give a couple of artist examples, and I'll start with Voice Drop. One artist we worked with over the holiday season was an artist called Low Cash from Nashville. And what Low Cash did was they put together some graphics and some messaging for Instagram. So they would say, hey, if you want to hear from us, there's an exclusive message on Voice Drop. Say get Voice Drop, and it illustrated it with an actual little animation. We also, similarly, my other company is called Pop Cult. Pop Cult is a podcast and microcast company. We did a microcast with an artist on Interscope Records last fall named K-Flay. And the beauty of that was what K-Flay did was she integrated her microcast, which is called What Am I Doing Here, into her overall marketing plan. So she was actually posting weekly updates to this microcast with these great animations that told people what to do. Told people it was launched exclusively on Amazon Alexa and on Google Assistant. It would tell people to ask Google Assistant, for what am I doing here, or play K-Flay show. So yeah, you have to, in the early going, people don't know to ask, and you have to tell them. The things that we found that work best are Instagram, but it's generally the rule of thumb is whatever is your biggest social is the one that's going to work best. So,
and you said microcasting. So when you're talking about microcasting, are you talking about like with the Amazon Alexa and what they're doing with flash briefings?
Well, microcasting is more of a short form podcasting. And what another thing that we found over the last year is there's basically voice and audio is that there's a continuum of the stuff that you can control on your own, and the distribution of that audio goes everywhere from voice to podcasting. And podcasting, honestly, is still where the biggest audiences are. So if you're going to go to the trouble of creating a weekly update that's produced, as opposed to something like a Voice Drop, which you can just talk into your phone, if you're going to do something that you're going to put a little production value into it, you're probably going to want to distribute it not only on voice, but also on podcast distribution, where you can also monetize it pretty well. That's all developing really quickly as well. Short form audio, I think, is the future in a lot of ways. And I think that every artist and every music marketer should be looking at short form audio as a piece of their marketing mix now, whether it's through podcasting, voice, or preferably both, because the industry in general the industry has this huge opportunity right now to take advantage of this frictionless listening experience that's offered by voice. And the only thing they're using it for is actually to listen to music. What's interesting is that things like podcasting and voice on a per listen basis can pay multiples of 5 to 10 times what the music pays. And that's for your promotional stuff. So there's a huge opportunity here. Music industry is very, very focused on driving streaming numbers. Anything that they do that is not, or let's just say the labels are very focused on driving streaming numbers, and most of the music industry managers and everybody else, anything that they do that doesn't directly contribute to that is non-priority. So this is one of the reasons that we have built Voice Drop, and also, Voxely has built Voice Drop and Pop Cult has built Microcast around driving streaming. Like, that is the goal. The goal is to get more people to listen to music. We're very clear about that. And that's why we built it into both products.
Yeah, I think if you're a musician listening, streaming is the answer. And so getting people to listen to music. When you're doing the microcast, I mean, would you say that a lot of the artists are putting their music on there, or is it more about like a getting to know them, a behind the scenes, what is their song about type of thing, so that the audience feels a better bond with the artist? Is that more of what it's about, you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, the point here still is that, the game in music is to get more people listening to you. And the more people who listen to you, the more people will buy tickets, the bigger the overall pot of money is. So and this is, again, one of the challenges is that most artists are better at singing about themselves than they are talking about themselves. So, a microcast is not for every artist, but the artists that are able to tell a story about themselves, create a mythology, create a community. Those are the people who are going to be best at this. It's a decent. It's not a bad way to convey music, but it's really not the point, and it's not fully. It doesn't. Music doesn't monetize directly as well through something like a podcast or a microcast or a voice drop as it does through a Spotify or an Apple Music. And again, the more numbers you aggregate on Spotify or Apple Music, the more people will end up listening to you on those things. There's an old record industry cliche: the more you sell, which is very true. It really is about getting up to a tipping point where the record breaks. And so there's a lot of incentive for everybody, and I agree with it. You want to drive people onto Spotify and Apple Music to actually do the music listening, which is not to say there shouldn't be any music in the podcast at all or the microcast. But the other thing we found, and this is from developing it, is that you don't necessarily have to have very much music in a podcast or a microcast to make it a good listening experience. And in fact, a good podcast or a good microcast, the music can really turn into an interruption of that experience, as opposed to sort of a pure play music experience. So we're not pushing hard for full length music to be included in microcasts or podcasts. What we're looking for in general is for people to tell the story the best way they can, so that people will want to listen to more of their music.
Yeah, I mean, myself as a branding person, I love to hear that. And I think behind the scenes, when I think of artists that do that really well, I mean, Billie Eilish definitely comes to mind in the way she interacts with her audience online. It's very well done, and people feel a connection with these people when they understand their stories. They feel closer to them. They want to listen to their music and go to their events, just as you're saying. I'm curious, you had worked for Pandora. You're thinking about Pandora, Apple Music, Spotify. I don't know if there's any other streamings companies out there I'm missing. But with Spotify now having purchased Gimlet, having focused on so much with the podcasting, do you see Spotify being more of a player within this kind of audio space and streaming, and that, musicians should be focusing there? Or do you kind of think everybody has their own place in a slightly different way?
I think really the latter. I mean, just both of those things are true. Spotify is and will continue to become a more important player in the podcast world and in the voice world. Although they're pretty disconnected from voice right now. Amazon and Google are really dominating that, and Apple to a lesser extent. But yeah, I think what's been curious is to see that Spotify and also the music labels have not necessarily doubled down on music content in their podcasting. They've really focused on podcast content, and Pandora to a certain extent. I mean, there's still a bit of a wall between the world of podcasting and the world of music, and that historically goes back to licensing issues. But now, with those things living in the same ecosystem, especially on Spotify, they're a little bit separated in Apple. Those things should be coming together more. The issue you get is that it's not a standardized behavior yet for artists to create this voice material, other than for radio stations, which they've been doing for a million years. But when they create something for a radio station, it's usually a drop that says you're listening to Z104. What they haven't gotten used to doing is, creating essentially the audio version of what they would do on socials or on their websites. And also what, Spotify and Pandora and Amazon Music will start to subsidize this stuff, and they've done some of it. The best music podcast I've heard ever was subsidized by Spotify. It's the Clash Stay Free, which I would encourage anybody to listen to, a gold standard of music podcasting. But they're not going to fund everybody's podcast. They can't. They're focused on the tippy top of the pyramid, and they'll pay a lot of money for that. So, Billie Eilish is going to get big checks written for her to do the stuff that she does. If you're an indie touring act who's playing in front of 100, 150 people, you're going to have to do it yourself. And the beauty of audio is that you can, and it's not as expensive as video. You don't have to glam yourself up. You can do it on the road. We built voice drops so that you can update your voice drops from your phone And Pop Cult, the company, the company that does podcasting and microcasting, we've built a distributed infrastructure where we actually give microphones that they, to people. Shure MV88. There you go. Sure, you get your plug. You can plug right into your iPhone. Send us the audio. We cut it. The whole thing is done in home studios, and we have not been disrupted one iota by this whole coronavirus, because everybody in our company is working out of their house already, including our editors. So.
Yeah, I agree. It makes a huge difference. I have another one, Ricky, she is on our team, Ricky Speck. She says, I have several friends that have had tours canceled. Any ideas on how to use voice tech right now to help get in front of their audience? So any other suggestions that you have for that?
I think voice is a piece in a more general strategy of what you should do if you're an artist who's had your tour canceled. And now I'll put on my managerial hat. And I've spoken to a lot of people in the last couple of weeks about what are they doing now that these tours are canceled. And the best advice that I've heard is you sort of treat this the way farmers used to treat the winter, which is you look at all of the things that you can't do because you're planning your tour and do those things. And one of those things right now is, start to develop your voice assets. Now, you can certainly I'm here to plug getvoicedrop.com, and you should definitely do that and sign up, and we'll get you hooked up. And I also think that microcasting is something you should look into. But I think in more generally speaking, take a step back and think about what would you do in audio? How do you contextualize yourself in audio, and how do you want to set up something that's sustainable? Because now that you're not in the hurly burly of the tour, you're not on the road, you're not sleep deprived, driving from place to place, forgetting which city you're in at any given time. It's like, how do you plan out when you come back, when you go back out on tour? How are you going to be talking to people, using voice and audio? And my prescription for myself, where I actually working on that side, would be, set up at least a weekly voice drop, and then think about how do you want to tell the story of your music on an ongoing basis in a more produced fashion, whether that's, a microcast that might be 10 minutes a week, whether it's a podcast, whether you're going to team up with other people to create some sort of online scene, which is something we're really interested in, because there are a lot of people who want to do it. We don't get a lot of resistance to people getting into voice. What we get a lot of is, how do I start? What works? And the answer is, we don't know yet. We're still building audience from the ground up. Voice has not had its one runaway hit, and it took, I don't think it's going to take as long as it took for podcasting to come to serial, which was something like 10 years. But, experiment, but use the cheapest tools you can. And we're trying to build those tools, pretty cheaply. So what I'm asking people to do, and what, our big win at Voxely and Voice Drop, is somebody coming up with a use for our thing that we didn't think of. And I know that's going to happen. Right now, what we're trying to do is service people just telling the story of what's going on in their lives now to somebody who asks. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I, even before voice, I guess a few years ago, there was a show, a movie on YouTube. I think it was something about happiness, and it's a couple that they kind of like rebuild like a bus, and they tour Canada, and the whole music is the woman, and it's her music and it's her story. And after the end, I was like, what is this album? I want to get it. Like, it's so good. And I streamed that for months because it was beautifully done, and I'm a dancer, so I would use it in class. So I totally hear what you're saying. When you create, again, that connection beyond the music and really with the person, and audio being a great way to do that with voice, it makes sense. And I like what you were saying earlier too about voice drops. Way back when, people were doing an audio spot for radio. So you were hearing it in that form before. It's just that now we have access to it in the way we want and how we want, which I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key. And to give some credit to Pandora, we were thinking about this when I was still there. Pandora has something called Pandora Stories, which I want to put in a plug for them, because it's a pretty cool thing. The idea when I was there was that we were going to put the tool in the artist's hands where they could create their own stories. Ultimately, as with many things, it's very difficult to teach an artist to do that. It requires a lot of education. They do have artist audio messaging on Pandora, which was introduced when I was there, and I'm very proud of that program. We did a great job giving voice to artists on Pandora, but it's only on Pandora. And so what we wanted to do was create some of that same dynamic, outside of that ecosystem and cross-platform. Because going back to your question about Spotify is very important. Apple's very important too. They're both growing, neck and neck. One of them passes the other, all the time. Amazon Music is also a huge and growing influence. Amazon, if my long money would be very much on Amazon. I think they're approaching music very, very smartly, but also in a very Amazon fashion, where they get very focused on one thing and then move to another, and they don't do everything at once. And at the same time, I think, the general advice is to try and be everywhere. So if you're doing a podcast, and again, Voice Drop is on Google and Alexa, not just Alexa. We want you to be able to create something in one place and put it everywhere, because when you're building an audience, when you're developing artists, you want to be in as many channels as you can be. Once you get the clout where you've got, Amazon or Spotify or Apple writing a big check for your exclusive, then you should start to consider it. But in the audience building phase, you want to try and be as many places as you can. And there's a lot of support available from the DSPs for music-oriented programming that hasn't been tapped right now, because the DSPs have told me this a lot. There's just not that much that's coming out that they can latch into, but there's nothing more that Pandora and Spotify and Apple would love than to do cross-promotion between music-oriented podcasts and the music itself. They're just not getting a lot to work with, and there needs to be more of that, and that's what we're trying to facilitate.
I love that. Again, I think another important point. And with so many people home now, I think the plus side is you have the ability to test things out, create, connect, try things. Just like you were saying, if you can't go on tour, what were you putting off because that was taking precedent? There's so many opportunities to do that now, which is incredible. Are there any artists that you're watching right now that you feel like are doing either have really gained a following or are really talented, or you're really excited to see grow, or maybe you're really handling kind of this branding audio side really well?
Well, I'll point back to not as many as I would like to. Yeah, not as many as I would like.
I don't want to choose a favorite, but if there's one you like.
No, I think we did a lot of great. I'll use the case study that we developed last fall. Pop Cult and K-Flay, wherein my partner embedded with her basically, although he was at home in San Francisco and LA, she's out on the road. And they put together, again, a microcast that came out every week, and it didn't matter where she was. She would be traveling through Europe a lot of the times. They would text back and forth. She would take her Shure MV88. She would, he would give her some scripting pointers. She would give him an idea. He would give her some scripting pointers. She would then, do the whole thing herself, send it back to him, and he would edit it. And that became a really excellent piece of content, which we're now turning into a podcast. We didn't actually release it as a podcast, but we found out, and in knowing what we know now, we would have gone to podcast and voice at exactly the same time. We didn't really think about, at the time, it was really a marketing exercise. We really didn't think much about monetizing it, but now that we see that there's potential for monetizing it in the podcast space and in the voice space, although I think it's going to take a while for voice to catch up, a lot of kudos to the team over at Interscope who saw this opportunity, who seem to be interested in doing more of it with the right artists, and to K-Flay for being somebody who was extraordinarily creative in how she approached it. Because what we did, we created something that was not like anything else, and you can. If you want to find it, you can find it on the K-Flay YouTube channel. You can actually listen to What Am I Doing Here there. I think when it finds podcast distribution, our number is going to be a lot better. And we've had a lot of interest from people in picking it up as a regular podcast or microcast. But that, I give them a lot of credit. It depends on what you're selling too. Somebody like Kids Bop, I don't know if you know much about Kids Bop, but Kids Bop is a kind of honestly, to me, a bit of a strange phenomenon, although it's not a strange phenomenon if you have had kids in the last 15 years.
And also, as someone who's a dance instructor too, it's
There
a
you
way
go.
to use
That's right.
popular music without the language, so it is good.
So, so Kids Bop, they got ahead of it, and they've got their own skill, which was worth the investment for them, because they've got their business is very circumscribed. They don't really have to worry too much about how incredibly about keeping in front of people. They've got a pretty good machine going there. They just need to keep cranking out the hits. However, they understood that a 4-year-old is growing up in a voice environment where there's never been no Alexa, and they don't want to. A 4-year-old doesn't want to even bother to type something in if they can, But a 4-year-old can ask Alexa for Kids Bop, and off they go. And they can play. They can ask for Kids Bop Star, and off they go. So I think those guys have a history. They came out of Razor and Tie. It's now Concord Music Group. Those guys have a history of thinking very, very cleverly in terms of marketing. And I think what they did, that was a good innovation. But again, they're few and far between, and I think there will be more, as in most music industry developments. Everybody's sort of looking at each other, waiting for the first thing to hit, and then they'll all come running in. And that is pretty much the way the entire industry works, because it's a fairly small industry too. So
yeah, and I think for people that are in the voice technology space as a whole, one of the things I've talked with a lot of the companies about is really focusing on a niche area. I think there's been a lot of voice technology companies where they say, "Oh, we create voice skills for everyone," and that's no longer a new thing. Like when 10 companies are saying the same thing, it's hard to differentiate who does what. But with your company really talking about we focus on the music industry and artists, that makes you guys the go-to for that. And I think that that's really wonderful that you've done that. Obviously, you have the experience, so do your other co-founders. For people that want to learn more about your company, about you, if they want to be a part of Voice Drops or they want to access some of the stuff you do, how and where can they do that?
So for Voice Drop, it's really simple. Getvoicedrop.com. That's a place that'll tell you a little about what Voice Drop does. It's got a form. You send us information, and we will get right to you. That's for that. The Voxely, the company, has its own website too, but Get Voice Drop is there for a reason, and it's there to get people on board and playing with it. And the more people who can do that, the better. So that's the main thing. And then Pop Cult Worldwide is we're in the process of putting our website together. We're too busy creating podcasts right now, but Get Voice Drop is the place to go for Voice Drop.
I love it. Yeah. And if you guys have any interest in what we're doing here at Voice, you can go to voicesummit.ai, follow our Facebook page for Voice and LinkedIn, and we will be doing hopefully more of these. If you guys have any questions about what we talked about today, please feel free to write in the comments, and myself or Lars can get back to you. But I thank you, Lars, for being here. This was a ton of fun and really educational, not only in voice, but in the music industry for artists as well. And I look forward to hearing more and about the artists that you bring on into your skills.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Keri. And I guess I'll mention, yes, I'm available. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, easy to find on Facebook as well. So thanks so much. Great talking to you. And hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Thank you.
All right.